higher taxes, increased minimum wage, and recreational marijuana. These are just some of the items packed into Governor Tom Wolf's most recent budget proposal. What are these objectives, and will they go anywhere in the state legislature? Former Representative Gordon Denlinger, head of the Pennsylvania National Federation of Independent Business, joins us to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. As he does every year, Governor Tom Wolf has introduced his newest budget proposal. This time a little different, doing it by video in the era of a pandemic. The governor has laid out bold initiatives. Some say the boldest proposal since his first one in 2015. So what are these proposals and will they go anywhere in the Republican-controlled legislature? We're joined by former Representative Gordon Denlinger, currently serving and directing the National Federation for Independent Business here in the state of Pennsylvania. Representative Denlinger, welcome back to Face the Issues. It's good to have you and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Sam. Great to be with you and Happy New Year to you too.
It is good to see you, my friend. This is every year the governor is going to make a budget proposal. Every year he's going to do a budget address. The first time this has been done virtually. So certainly a mark of the era, I suppose you could say. It's a $37.8 billion budget proposal. There's a lot in here that is fairly regular. Governors want to increase education funding, things like that. And then there's some things that are kind of jump out at us. The legalization of recreational marijuana, the tax increase, which we'll get to. I want to ask you, Gordon, you work with businesses across the state. In addition to that tax increase, which we'll get to later on, was there anything in this budget that jumped off at you that surprised you that the governor would propose something like this in this environment?
Well, I will say that Governor Wolf has been fairly consistent in his budget proposals year over year. So there are quite a number of things that are, shall we say, retreads, trot them out, maybe with a little bit of nuance or change in the approach, but quite a number of consistent themes. You mentioned the tax hike, the PIT, personal income tax hike, in the middle of it, and that is sort of the big, bold move by Wolf, shall we say, for this round. But a lot of the other initiatives are kind of his standards that he's brought forward, and but with little shifts and changes here and there.
And one of the big ones, which perhaps is not economic when we see it, from a surface level, the governor claims that this will help bring revenue into the state, is the idea of legalizing recreational marijuana. Pennsylvania has medical marijuana for certain conditions. You have to have a license and so forth. Obviously, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman has made this a central part of his agenda and of his various campaigns, now running for Senate in 2022. The legalization of recreational marijuana, it's an odd issue because in the past, some Republicans have been very supportive of it, and you see some Democrats fall off the train on this one. What do you make of this? If this were to be run alone, away from a budget, would it have the votes in the state legislature?
I don't believe so, Sam. At this point, Pennsylvania's political makeup, I believe, would still be conservative enough, and that's both Republican and rural Democrats would be concerned enough about that societal direction that I don't think that makes it over the goal line as a standalone issue or, frankly, as a component to this year's budget. But it is kind of the movement of Wolf toward this issue. He, of course, supported the medical side early. He had, I think, embraced it more when Lieutenant Governor Fetterman joined him midway through Wolf's time in office. And so he's kind of put his arms around the recreational marijuana issue. But at this point, probably not the votes in the Assembly on a bipartisan basis to make a thing like that move forward.
Is there a concern, if it did move forward, drug law is federal territory. It's federal jurisdiction. And a lot of these states are getting away with it right now because the Obama administration and the Trump administration have elected to not enforce those drug laws when it comes to marijuana. Is there a concern that if that were to shift, that we're banking on budget money coming from something that is not actually within the state's jurisdiction?
There's a lot of, I mean, it is, as you say, a scheduled controlled substance. And there's banking issues involved in that. Can you, take proceeds and, process banking related to it? All kinds of federally related issues tied to that issue. So, yeah, I mean, clearly in a number of states it is happening, Colorado being the big first one. Mixed bag, legally, jurisdictionally. I think there is some expectation for movement on that issue at the federal level. But there again, with the Senate, U.S. Senate being 50-50 with Vice President Harris being the tiebreaker, not sure again enough bipartisan votes to move it in Washington. So that issue, I think, is somewhat stuck at this point. But you never know. Politics does interesting things every day.
Well, I mean, isn't that the truth? We've seen that the last several years. Gordon, the other big piece of this, and we've talked about this issue before, is an increase in the minimum wage, which is currently $7.25. The governor has it going to $15 an hour gradually. I believe the first stop is $12 and then up to $15. We've talked before that there may not be an appetite for $15 an hour. Is there a compromise position here where that Republicans would come up to say $10 perhaps or $12, and would Democrats move down to that? I mean, as the legislature now goes through this budget, do you think that we see a compromise issue on this, or do you think it's all or nothing for either party?
Well, shall we say the left or, the Democratic Party largely has made $15 a brand marker, that they are really promoting that. All of their campaign ads and so forth are calling for the $15 minimum wage. I fully expect there to be federal movement on this issue, and I'm hearing words of some degree of compromise in and around the 11 to an 11 and a quarter marker as a place that might move the issue forward at the federal level. Of course, Pennsylvania operates at the 7 and a quarter minimum wage currently, which is still the federal level that was put in place, I think, during the Obama administration. So it goes back a little ways. Here in the state, should the federal not move it forward, there will be a renewed discussion over it. But again, not sure that it moves in the Pennsylvania House or Senate under Republican control. Essentially, people are free to pay any wage they want. So nobody's saying you can't pay 15 or 20 an hour if you're in business. That said, there's certainly a regional aspect to this. We know that in the eastern and Philly suburban counties, wages have moved beyond that. The market's taken them beyond minimums. You get out into the rural areas, Western PA, things are a little different. So there's a regional aspect in Pennsylvania. But I anticipate federal action on that, which will supersede anything we do at the state. If the federal level does not move it, then yes, keep an eye on that one here in Pennsylvania. And, that 10 to 12 zone probably becomes the point of discussion under which, with things given to both sides, Republican and Democrat, some kind of a compromise could be achieved. That said, as an advocate for small business, we, NFIB, remain opposed to any change in minimum wage. We support the free market from a labor standpoint and, believe that folks should be paid based on their value as employees in relationship to their employer and what's achievable and possible for their employer's finances. So there are limits there financially for small business owners. But it's a big issue, still a hot issue. But at this point, I think federal moves first, and if not, then we'll look at the state.
What do you think will happen in this budget? I mean, they're supposed to get this through by June. We know that rarely happens in this state. But do you think they drop this out of the budget for the current budget cycle?
I think in times past, they've tried to separate budget and minimum wage,
Mhm.
which is not really a component of the budget process. I think there will be calls to say, let's separate that out, run that as a separate item, and have hearings and consider it, but not bake that into the budget process. So here in the spring, again, if the federal does not act, it could become a separate item, but I think the Republican majorities will look to, if they are willing to move a bill on that, separate it out and make it its own standalone issue.
That makes sense. Representative, last question here in this segment. We said at the start, these are our bold proposals. The governor's first budget in 2015 infamously failed in the House unanimously, and every member of his own party voted it down. It was I think, the biggest budget defeat in Pennsylvania history for a governor. Does this, some people are drawing comparisons, saying that these are bold initiative items. You just said that this is fairly consistent with some of the things that he's campaigned on and has proposed over the years. Do you see this as failing in the or passing in the bipartisan sense, or where do you think the future for this budget goes?
Yeah, Sam, for a lot of it, frankly, the term dead on arrival comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that I work with staffers over on Capitol Hill who are indicating they're not going to waste the hours to even like do analysis on pieces of this budget. It's so far removed from passability and reality that that dead on arrival does seem to be what's happening here. Yeah, it's a bold proposal, and credit Wolf with not just hanging up his beliefs and going home. That said, you would hope that 7 years into the job, the realities of the legislative process might have informed this budget, and that something that's maybe a little more modest in nature, still addresses some of his priorities, could have carried the day. But he swung for the fences with this one, absolutely. And to your earlier point, it was the first virtually delivered budget, so the production value was amazing, and it's worth going out to see. It looked like a infomercial done Hollywood style, as opposed to the traditional, very maybe tired joint session in the chamber with everybody clapping or booing based on their views. So this was a first, and it was Wolf speaking to the public more directly than Wolf particularly addressing the chambers, House and Senate chambers. But ultimately, you got to have, as they say, 102 in the House, 26 in the Senate, and one signature of the governor's to get anything through. So he sort of talked past the General Assembly to the people, but he needs the General Assembly to get it done.
As the young people say today, taking his shot, and so we'll see how that goes. Representative Denlinger, when we come back, I want to break down that incredibly important issue, that part of the budget that we call the tax increase. And so don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Representative, I want to shift now to the part that we've been speaking about earlier, the idea that this probably the biggest part of this budget is a tax increase, and it's an increase specifically in the income tax. I know there's a lot of talk, and we hear a lot of talk surrounding the idea of property tax. This is a proposal to increase the income tax. Now, before we even get there, Pennsylvania has a flat income tax rate, which is different from the way the IRS handles the federal income tax. Could you break that down a little bit, just so our viewers know what it is that we're talking about here?
Absolutely. In the Pennsylvania state constitution is something called the uniformity clause. What that says basically is everybody of a similar class must be taxed in exactly the same way. And so everybody who earns income must be taxed at a flat rate. So for Pennsylvania, that's 3.07% and has been since the Rendell years. So it's been in place for a while. It is a fairly modest rate. So, of all the taxes in Pennsylvania's landscape of taxes, we rank pretty good on this one relative to other states. So it's clear why Governor Wolf went after it. It's because that 3.07 compares favorably to other states. That said, The governor has proposed increasing it 46% from its current 3.07 to 4.49%. He has also implemented a sort of tax forgiveness scheme to try to implement a sort of backdoor
Hmm.
graduated income tax system, which, as I mentioned, the uniformity clause is frankly unconstitutional, but he's hanging his hat on some pretty thin legal doctrine. We do allow forgiveness at a very low rate of income for the poorest of the poor, and he's trying to use that to put in place this system, which would declare poor to be 84,000 and down in annual income. That's pretty good poverty at 84,000. So hey, so the governor's trying to backdoor this graduated system. The big thing for small business, which is my
Hmm.
universe, is that most businesses, in fact, nationally, about 92% of businesses pay their taxes as what's called subchapter S or pass-through
Hmm.
entities. So they pay their business taxes at the personal income tax
Hmm.
rate. So in a time when the pandemic has landed on small business harder than any other business segment, the governor comes forward with a small business tax increase of 46%. How that helps Pennsylvania's economy and our small businesses recover and thrive, I frankly cannot comprehend. I have no way to process that. It's just kind of stunning, frankly, that when business is down, small business is down for the count, the governor says, "Hey, let's dump on another 46% in personal income taxes." So it's not just small business; it's all of us that are
Hmm.
individual. When we do our tax returns, we also would get hit with a 46% tax hike. In tough economic times, frankly, we're sliding into recession at this point. It's the wrong answer at the wrong time.
I want to ask you about the this tax forgiveness thing. You said earlier that the Constitution mandates in Pennsylvania, the Constitution mandates a flat tax rate, and so in this state, everybody pays 3.07. It doesn't matter what you make. That's the tax rate. This is very different than the federal taxes, where there are brackets. So there are no brackets in the Pennsylvania tax code. Is that correct?
That would be correct for income tax purposes. That is exactly right.
So is the governor not proposing tax brackets because he can't do it outright? And so he's proposing a system in this way to almost backdoor tax brackets in.
Absolutely right, Sam. And um, Pennsylvania, I guess you'd say he's a progressive,
Mm-hmm.
and it is sort of a progressive doctrine that people get taxed at different rates relative to their income levels. And certainly going after wealthier individuals has been a mantra of
Mm-hmm.
the left. And so he's living that out. That said, Pennsylvania's income tax being flat for individuals and small businesses is probably one of the few competitive advantages that we have compared to other states. Pennsylvania is not exactly the place everybody wants to move to.
Mm-hmm.
And young people graduating from colleges are doing the outward migration thing. At this point, is taking away or impairing one of the last good things we have going on tax wise in PA, a good plan. I would say absolutely not. The other thing you mentioned, the constitutional aspect
Mm-hmm.
of this. Would this run headlong into the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court and a ruling of unconstitutionality? Hard to say. The court's been sort of converted to sort of left activism, as we say. So who knows? Does the Constitution hold up in that court or not? I think there's enough reasons from recent decisions to question whether that would be the case. Wolf might actually succeed at the court level, but he has to get it through the assembly first. And this tax hike, 46% on individuals and small business, is absolutely dead on arrival.
So you talk about the pass-through idea. So small businesses, instead of paying a corporate tax rate, I mean they're not registered as S corps. So instead of paying a corporate tax rate, what they're doing is that the income that their small business makes passes through, it's following their personal income tax return, and so they pay that flat tax rate in Pennsylvania. But if they're hiking the tax rates, it's not just when you look at income levels. It's not just saying this is what they drew from it, but this is what their business drew. Is that correct in that understanding?
That's essentially correct. I mentioned 92% of businesses pay their taxes as pass-throughs at that personal rate,
Hmm.
which means that 8% pay it the other way, and that's registered as a C
Hmm.
corporation and paying taxes under the Pennsylvania corporate net income tax rate of
Hmm.
9.99%, second highest in the nation. It's again one of the reasons major corporations do not look to Pennsylvania as a good place to locate headquarters or grow and expand because they're going to get hit with that second highest in the nation CNI or corporate net income tax rate. Wolf does put into his proposal a 25% reduction of that CNI rate,
Hmm.
but it only helps the biggest
Sure.
corporations, not the little guys. So there again, as we look at the economic landscape in the pandemic era, the big corporations have actually done reasonably
Hmm.
well. It's the little guys, the mom and pop shops and stores that have gotten hit. So here we are cutting taxes on the big guys that have done pretty well and raising taxes on the small businesses that have absolutely gotten decimated through this pandemic.
What what would this? You guys said it's dead on arrival, but what if this had passed? Obviously, would face legal challenges. But what would the impact be? I mean, we've seen the pandemic shutter so many small businesses, many of the members of your organization. What would the impact be if this kind of tax went through, especially right now in the midst of the pandemic that we're witnessing?
You know, Sam, it's another wave of closures, quite frankly, and you take the minimum wage issue as kind of a big one relative to cost, business costs. And then you add in an income tax hike, and that's the one-two punch that's really going to take out more of our small businesses. And, we're all trying to survive, and small business owners have done an amazing job trying to navigate the mandated closures and the health and safety protocols. Thankfully, they're really stepping up, doing a great job with that. That said, do we need government to reach down and try to crush them right at this very time? Absolutely not. And that's why small business owners are reaching out to their senators and representatives and saying, hey, wrong time for a tax hike and wrong time for a minimum wage hike. We need to get through this. Let us get healthy again. Let us get back to hiring people and hopefully surviving. And then we can look at the future on that basis.
Sure. Representative Denlinger, thank you so much. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. Representative Denlinger, thank you again for your time. In closing, I want to ask you about some history that was recently made in Pennsylvania politics, in very much along the lines where you work. The state auditor general and state treasurer seats in two of the row offices in Pennsylvania have long been held by Democrats. Again, very, very few Republicans that hold either of those seats in the last 50, 60 years. That trend has been broken. Stacey Garrity is the newly elected state treasurer, and Timothy DeFore has become the first African American elected to statewide office in the state, becoming our new auditor general. You have worked with both of them in their new roles. I mean, they've only been in for a month, but you've begun to work with both of them. What are you seeing? What hopes do you have for these two new administrations?
Well, yes, Sam, historic is spot on. That is the right word. And I think you'd have to go back. I heard somewhere 1956 was the last time that both of these offices were held by Republicans. And both really qualified, dynamic individuals. Tim DeFore is an auditor's auditor. I mean, in terms of putting somebody in that office who will run it well and be a government watchdog, the kind that we need. I think he's going to do a great job. That agency performs 4,700 financial audits every year and a whole host of performance audits. So, looking for good things from Auditor General DeFore and also Stacey Garrity, who was, I think, more of a surprise upset win.
Mm.
And she, as treasurer, has jumped into the role and is developing relationships, tackling policy initiatives, definitely wants to run Treasury in an efficient, effective way and in an ethical way as
Mm.
well. But yes, two historic changes there. And I think that in government, we have Governor Wolf and Attorney General Shapiro. We need sort of the other side to balance that out. So I think some balance, checks and balances, if you will, are very important, and I think both these individuals will serve in that way very well.
Yeah, certainly a shocker. Everyone talks about the election in terms of the White House, but a very, very good night for Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania, minus the White House. So certainly a shocker. One note: the 1956. They're the first Republicans, if my notes are correct, they're the first Republicans elected that since 1956 that have not either switched parties or become convicted. Of course, the other two were Barbara Hafer and Bud Dwyer, and so a little bit of Pennsylvania history. But Representative Denlinger, thank you so much for joining us, for your insights on these incredibly important issues, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Sam. Great to join you today.
It's our pleasure, and that is our show for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back again with us next week. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.